Hi, I'm Matt Barron, Product Specialist at Invigate. Thank you for taking the time to click play. Your time is valuable and I appreciate that. Throw some comments and questions down below, disagree with me, point out my errors. This isn't gospel. Your mileage will vary because every team and organization is unique. The place where I learned the most about user research and survey writing was when I left traditional IT consulting to become an experienced design consultant, where we would leverage human-centered research practices to implement the design cycle on products and experiences for employees and customers. I've extracted the wisdom that I have into this presentation today. I've been in IT and customer service support for over 20 years. And one time I had a senior VP named John who pushed me, a service desk agent at the time, and my fellow agents past what we were able to do. He was asking us to support his personal cell phone, yes, the original iPhone, yes, I'm that old, his laptop, his hotspot. And it got so bad that one day I actually found myself in my office with my manager, and John came in and was apologizing to me. This was shocking to me because he is the senior VP of sales. And what I realized, or what we learned, is that the reason he was pushing us so hard is because his team wasn't making quota. They weren't able to make their goals because they weren't able to work in the surgery centers and the clinics that they were in every day. So my manager at the time, in her infinite wisdom, from this point forth, leveraged John to create this conduit between IT and sales. And that's our goal here. How do we connect our services and those whom we serve? How do we get the power without the trauma? So this is our challenge. And we've got lots of tools at our disposal. You see some traditional and modern ones, and hopefully you're leveraging some of these already. Now, I'm not advocating to just throw away the traditional methods, but to encourage you to explore the modern methods. Because we've got a lot of tools, we might as well use them. And my goal is to destroy surveys for you, completely destroy the idea of sending surveys to you, and move over to conducting user research and that sort of thing, creating feedback loops and voice of the customer programs. So enough said, let's get into it. People just want to be heard. Surveys are an attempt to measure the intangible, non-measurable messiness and feelings of humans. This is how we gather opinions of our experiences and that we deliver every day. These data points through analysis give us the opportunity to know our people better, their expectations, and meet their needs. And what's funny about this value chain of surveys, being able to measure and report in order to analyze and understand, to learn and change, is that oftentimes our surveys end at just measuring and reporting. And this is actually the most important part, the most important thing to consider. The reason we need to get rid of surveys in a lot of cases is because we don't actually go past measuring and reporting, which is failing. That's failing your team, that's failing your company. That's actually creating negative return on investment because you're wasting everyone's time. You're taking their time and collecting their input and then not even sharing it with people. Even just moving to analyzing and understanding is a huge step forward for a lot of people. So this is the most important part. Do not fall into the trap of vanity metrics. Collecting metrics just because you always have, or to have those metrics. If you're not making changes based on those metrics, why are you even doing it? Maybe it'd be for a bonus program or something like that, but you need to actually consider why you're sending those surveys. Yes, you maybe still need to collect your metrics, your statistics, but then is the survey actually serving the needs of the people you serve? And that's important to consider. You might need to change your surveys to serve the people that you serve. So it makes sense at this point to kind of punch some holes in those metrics that we often gather from surveys to kind of show how they're not as valuable as we expect them to be, or they're not actually indicative of the user experience. So let's start with customer satisfaction. The first part with customer satisfaction is that people are never satisfied, no matter what. Even if I got a customer service that I would rate a 10, I can still imagine what 11 would be. not having to call customer service, right? And so customer satisfaction creates this false reality that people can be satisfied, as well as making it fit into a 10-point scale, which is totally subjective. What's a 6 to me might be a 10 to someone else. What's a 10 to someone else might be a 4 to me. So it's really important to understand that this isn't necessarily a great way to judge their satisfaction. Now, I get my recipes through online ratings because that's what Google tells me, how many stars a recipe gets. But how much of a meal's experience has to do with the recipe? I see it all the time on recipe reviews. People change or go off script or, even replace ingredients and then leave a negative review. Is that really the recipe's fault? It's not actually an accurate judge of the recipe, which people are not a great judge of those things. So what ingredients did you buy? What was the quality of them? What shape are your tools in? Are your knives sharp? Is the Teflon flaking off your pan and into your food? That's going to affect the flavor. Who did you eat with? What was the conversation like? And you can see how this context can completely change the scoring. The same thing goes for our services. The context will change their satisfaction. Is the person actually satisfied in their job? Do they hate coming to work? Did they just miss a goal or a bonus based on their laptop being available or not? Was there loud noise when they were calling the service desk? Were they driving when they called the service desk? It's pretty hard to troubleshoot laptop issues while someone's driving. So my point is that the context is really going to influence this response, and the fact that satisfaction is a myth, plus the subjectivity of a 1 to 10, and humans are never satisfied. So although averages are nice, it's important to see the spread. And if you need to still continue to capture this metric, do so, but just understand that it's not actually indicative of true satisfaction. Customer effort score always makes me giggle a little bit, but really don't ever ask a person to rate their effort on something, because just the act of asking has therefore increased the amount of effort they have had to put forth. You will get a lower rating just by asking it. This is something that you should be able to gather with telemetry. How many times do you pick up the phone and it says your call is recorded? Well, what is it recorded for? Check the effort. How much effort did I have to put in to communicate with your service desk agent? How much effort, just even the call duration would be a good metric to use. The same thing goes for your tickets. How many interactions did I have to have with the agent? Every time that effort goes up. So we should already know this answer. So asking it can be seen as tone deaf and insensitive. And if it's on your surveys, people are already starting to not have trust in your surveys. Net Promoter Score is another one that's really important for us to cover, because not only is this completely useless in an internal IT service desk, it does have some value in customer and external facing service desks. Although I would argue that that's highly focused on the product if you name it like that way. If you word it in such a way to say, would you recommend our product to your family or friends? You may need to word it specifically to your support experience. But if you've written this for an internal IT service desk on your surveys, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Your employees don't have a choice about who to call for the service desk. They only get one service desk commonly. Some organizations have multiples, but they might not have a choice. So asking them to recommend to a colleague doesn't make any sense. We also should talk about the calculation of NPS, because this is widely misunderstood. So we'll just take a moment to go through this. And the way that Net Promoter Score is, or the way that the concept was originally created, was you ask, would you recommend our service to a family or friend? Rate that on a scale of 1 to 10. Would not recommend at all. Totally, I recommend you all the time. Let's forget the fact that 1 to 10 is subjective. But what you get then is people who've rated you 1 to 6, those are your detractors. Those are the people that would not recommend you. 7 to 8 are considered neutral. And 9 to 10 are considered your promoters, thus Net Promoter Score. So then you take the percentage of responses that are negative, 1 through 6, and you subtract the percentage of responses that are positive, 9 and 10, and there you have your NPS. So you can actually have a negative number on your NPS. And people sometimes don't even realize this. Like, they don't actually take those percentages. They just say how much of the percentage of people are 9 and 10. That's not the right way to calculate it. And let's take into consideration the fact that 7 and 8 are very close to being satisfied or promoting your product or service, because they're so close. Why wouldn't we pay attention to those people? They're so close. We could actually just maybe make a little change and they'd already be a promoter. Also consider the fact that if you take someone from a 1 to a 6 in this method, there's still a detractor. There's still your NPS hasn't changed at all, even though you've improved that person's service 6-fold. So this isn't a great metric, I don't think, for customer service. But if you are needing to use it, go ahead. And if you are using it, then definitely check out NPS 3.0. It's a new version that the original author has created. Check it out on HBR, Harvard Business Review. It basically combines this rating with some other customer activities to validate and deepen the measurement. Anyway, I get too worked up about NPS, so let's go on. QSTAC, the new kid on the block, and I'm going to beat up on it a little bit, but there is some merit in there. So again, the 1 to 10, not a good way to measure things because it's totally subjective. Quality is something that is going to be subjective on that scale. Speed is something that we should be able to determine with telemetry, open to close, how fast did it go? Technical knowledge, not something that I would typically ask someone calling a service desk about to judge someone's technical knowledge, right? They're calling the service desk. And maybe this is something that I would throw in training or career development. Approachability is my favorite in QSTAC, because whether or not I will approach a service desk is a very good sign about how I feel. Do I feel comfortable? Do I feel welcomed? Do I feel like I'm being treated like a professional? You see how I used feel 3 times to describe approachability. It definitely has some merit. I'm not sure that a 1 to 10 scale works in that case, but maybe don't measure it that way. And then communication, another one that could be solved with telemetry. How many calls did it take? How many emails did it take? How long did it take for me to understand what they were saying in email? So all this punching on metrics is really just to help us consider the context and purpose of our surveys. Who is finding value in the results? Is it serving the people that we serve? We must truly consider the value of a survey to improve the experience. To write better surveys, we need to reverse engineer this. We need to go from what questions I'm asking to what I would change based on those questions. So this is just a list of potential categories of improvements. This isn't all inclusive. Your objectives may not even fit into these categories. My point is, though, that you need to share this stuff with your customers, the people you're surveying, the people you're providing or conducting user research with. In fact, that's part of user research. Commonly, when you're interviewing or conducting card sort studies or usability tests or whatever it may be, that you communicate why you're conducting this research. What is actually going to change? What is their input going to do to the organization and how it's going to impact them? So also you want to consider that if someone's going to give you input, you need to be ready to take action, right? I'm not going to ask my dog if he wants to take a walk if I can't or don't have time to take a walk, because he's going to follow me around the house, tripping me at every corner until we go for one. The same thing goes with my kids. I don't ask them if they want ice cream unless I'm totally prepared to go get ice cream, because it's obvious. They're going to say yes. I need to be ready to take action. So the same goes for your surveys. Let people know what you plan to change based on their responses. And once you know where you're headed and that you're going to do it via user research or a survey, you kind of need to get into the middle. You need to get to understanding people and what is going to drive them to give you good input. So even though I said it at the beginning, I'll say it again. People don't even understand themselves very well. It's really hard to understand people. Think about miscommunication. How often miscommunication happens. How often we can't actually express our emotions properly. And so, putting this in a system doesn't necessarily fix that problem. We also need to watch out then for this false data. Where are times where I'm saying I'm satisfied, but I'm really not? It's possible that I'm filling in 10s, but then I put in a negative story in the comments. So it's important that when we're trying to measure people, that we don't necessarily try to fit them into a box. They don't necessarily fit into 1 to 10. They have that subjectivity of 1 to 10, but I suggest adding a comment field. Let them tell their story. Oftentimes this just feels like you're removing a muzzle. Like, hey, you can finally just talk to us about how things are happening. Because there is this frustration that occurs when you make people fit into specific metrics on a survey. A good example of this is the iPod. If Apple had just asked people what they wanted when they were developing this product, they probably would have never gotten to this point, because people don't necessarily imagine what they want. The iPod was the culmination of decades of user research, lots of iterations. They would take that research, come up with insights, develop prototypes, test them, figure out where they failed, do that a bunch until it launched. And eventually they found out that people just wanted a battery-operated music device in their pocket with headphones. There were other MP3 players before the iPod, like the Zune, and I think there were some other USB-based ones. But that user research made Apple go the next step. It really brought them to understand the users and how they felt and what they wanted, beyond what they could imagine themselves and beyond what their users could imagine. Through that iterative process, they continued to improve that product until it was ready to be released. I'll give you another example. Let's say you hike a 5-mile mountain up and a 5-mile mountain down. Well, I guess that's going to happen, right? Because you can only go down as far as you went up. But you get to the bottom and the ranger asks you, did you enjoy today's hike? And you say yes, and they check yes on their clipboard, and off you go. Prove it. What are the metrics that can prove that you enjoyed today's hike? Is it the number of selfies you took? Is it the number of smiles you had while you were hiking? The ranger might be able to see that. You went up alone and you came down with someone. You made a friend while you were hiking. They won't necessarily understand everything that happens along the journey, but they might have some more context if they just pay attention to what's going on. But beyond just asking yes or no, ask for the story. I enjoyed the breeze on my face. The view at the top is amazing. Then you're able to see not whether people are enjoying it or not, but what they are actually getting out of it. What is the outcome that they're seeing? What do they enjoy about the experience or not enjoy about the experience? Because the truth is that our feelings are impacted by these little tiny things that happen along the way. Those details in a service transaction can mean the difference between a 0 and a 10. So you also need to consider that there's going to be bias and problems changing people to change their ratings of something. Like if I've always rated the service desk a 5 out of 10, it's going to be tough to get me to get to a 7. So there is that sort of like stickiness that happens. So all we can do is collect data that makes sense and try to collect those stories and then analyze it for insights. That's the next step in the design cycle. So you get all these stories, you collect 1,000 survey responses, and everyone's typed up a little story about what they like or don't like. How are we actually going to analyze this data? So I suggest an analysis workshop where you get together stakeholders that are going to help you go through this analysis. And the beauty of this is that people are going to actually see this research themselves. They're going to touch it, they're going to read it, they're going to listen to it, they're going to, whatever they do with it, they're working with it. So they're actually seeing it. And there's no faith that they have to give that you calculated the survey results properly. They're actually seeing it and hearing it from customers. So if you get together a group of, say, 20 stakeholders and you've got 1,000 responses, split those people up into groups of 5. So you've got 4 groups of 5, let's say, and then you split up the the 1,000 responses into 4 because you have those 4 groups of 5. So you split them up into 250 responses. You give each group their own subset of the research, and people are reading through it to each other, or they're listening to it. And while they're listening to it and reviewing it, they're jotting down, what are the insights? What do I see here? What is really important? And they're discussing in their smaller groups what they find important, and they're putting that on Post-its or in notes. Maybe they've got 2 or 3 pink Post-its per group, so they have their most important insights on those. And then they can come back together as a big group and put those on the wall. Do a research wall where you group like Post-its together. Maybe the theme is communication around one, and people just, the tone of voice actually matters, in our organization. We need to work on that. Or maybe it's soft skills, or maybe it's the hardware we ship people, or the applications. But you're going to group those together, and you'll start to quickly visualize and understand the themes and the needs and the various aspects of your service that need to change. And the people in the room will also see this forming. So they'll come to the same conclusions, which is beautiful, because you won't need to convince them what needs to change. They'll know what needs to change because they came up with the answers themselves. So this gets teams focused and aligned on your purposes at the very onset of understanding what's in the research. From there, you can use that same group, maybe switch the research. So every team does a different set, and then they come back again. That would really solidify and continue to drive more insight finding. And in that second round, they're going to be thinking about the insights they already heard and maybe get more details. But you can see how this iteration is going to drive results for your company and for your teams. Get used to failing at this a few times, though, because you might need to try this a few different times before it works well. Another thing you can do is, if you map out your journeys or map out your services or experiences in any way, you can put the feedback directly on those maps. So this is an onboarding process that I mapped out with a customer of mine, and you can see that we put the feedback right on the map. So you can see, on the left here, there's a manager that has a comment. It would be great if all the onboarding stuff for new hires was in the same spot. And I conducted this research. They weren't the only manager to say that. Every manager said that in an organization. So it was very common that was something that they wanted. So clearly that's an objective. Clearly that's an insight that we would find. And then we can start building ideas. How do we get all that into one spot? What does that look like? How do we get HR and IT knowledge bases together so that all the onboarding is one spot? Maybe one team owns part of it and another team owns part of it. But you can see how putting this makes it easy for us to putting the feedback directly on there makes it easy for us to visualize what needs to change and keep that top of mind while we're looking at these maps and trying to improve experiences. This map also helps because it can eliminate multiple surveys. We actually did find that HR was sending one, facilities was sending one, and IT was sending one during this onboarding process. That's going to cause a lot of survey fatigue. So we combine those into one survey, and the departments can still get what they need. We just split the data up. So if this all seems a bit esoteric, if I've completely destroyed surveys for you, great, I've done my job. I'm just kidding. But just understand that I do recognize that some orgs and teams need to collect surveys. You need those metrics, either because bonuses are involved or because organizational goals are related to them. But I do want you to just consider, stopping sending the surveys, because this is kind of where the industry is moving. You see cutting edge companies cutting out surveys and starting to put that survey into the experience. So at this point, I am going to go through tips and tricks to actually get survey results and how to do that and how to build trust and get more valuable responses. So if you must send a survey, send as few as possible. Send the minimum possible to achieve your goal. You might just be able to send it to one person, right? If you're just trying to validate one aspect of service. Secondly, only send as many surveys as you can take action on. If you send out a survey and you get 1,000 great responses of things you need to implement, that's like 5 years of work for most teams. So don't send any surveys after that. or decrease the number that you send initially and just, eventually ramp it up so that surveys are being sent to everyone. But the idea is don't send more than you can take action on. Are you sending surveys 100% of the time on every transaction? It's probably not a great idea. What is your response rate? If it's not 100%, you're probably sending too many. You could actually up your response rate by decreasing the number of surveys that you send. So don't send it 100% of the time. Send it 50% of the time. That would probably double your response rate, or at least, improve it in some way. So consider adjusting that percentage. Also consider adjusting your timing, the context, because if something breaks and then I get a survey about it right away, chances are I've got a bad taste in my mouth still. I don't actually want to provide positive feedback because the whole thing was broken. That's not positive. If I wait a couple days or a week, sometimes people forget the break. They're back to using services as normal, and they can actually give you a fair judgment of the service that they received, but not all the time. Again, leverage context clues. If I'm an executive and I just spent 14 emails trying to get a laptop swapped out, don't ask me how much effort it took. Don't ask me about communications. That survey is a major waste of time, and it's going to reduce confidence in the value of those surveys. Finally, you definitely want to collect data as part of the experience if you can. Instead of emailing your users and causing another interruption, collect it right on the phone. Have the agent actually ask, how would you rate my survey today, 1 to 10? Maybe your culture isn't okay with that, but a lot of times that will work, especially in more positive cultures. You could also have a third party do it on the phone, or make it part of the experience in some other way. Use your imagination. But you want to make it lightweight and easy to participate, not only in the experience, but if you are sending a survey, that it be one click. So if you are sending a 1 to 10, how would you rate our service? Make sure they can click on it and register their response. If it's a happy, sad, same thing. Just make sure it's one click. They don't have to log in. They don't have to remember another password. This is going to improve your response rate and improve people's confidence in your ability to listen and collect survey responses. So for when to send a survey, don't. Surveys are your last resort. Only survey if you have no idea how the service transaction went. And ideally, it would be great if users could choose whether they get surveys or not. So the best way to get insights to act upon is to not send a survey. It's to actually look at the service itself, look at the experience itself. If the user types into the ticket, this was a horrible transaction, don't ask them to provide feedback. They already did. So start with telemetry. What do you already know about the experience? Can you determine sentiment from call recordings? Can you track how many interactions there are in a ticket? This is usually a very open opportunity for most teams. Next, if you don't know how the ticket went, make sure you follow the timing advice from the last slide and just make it quick and easy to do. Vary when you're sending it and make it one click. Maybe just an IM or a quick email would replace a survey. It's a great way to form connections as well, or have a conversation. If you're in a high volume call center and you do need to actually send the 1 to 10 and you're sending out 10,000 of these a day, make sure you leave a spot for the story. Sometimes it can just feel like a relief to be able to tell your story and not be stuck in that 1 to 10 that you're forced into on a survey. Finally, you want to make sure that your surveys contain content that your people care about, the surveyee cares about, because if it's not about something they care about, then they won't respond or you won't get good results. If the question is how timely were we in our responses, but I was the one busy, I'm the customer and I'm holding up the process, then I don't care about your timeliness. I don't care how long it took because I was the one holding it up and I want to go at my speed. So you can see how some of those survey questions just don't make any sense at all. So what's in it for me? The WIIFM. We need to measure and report in order to analyze and understand, in order to learn and change. And that learn and change is what's in it for me. Letting the target know what's going to happen if they provide feedback will improve the quantity and quality of your responses. Telling employees that their tools will improve based on their survey responses is a great way to get better input on their tools. They're going to care, and they're going to know what you're going to do with the data. That's huge. So always kind of be considering these unasked questions that your users and customers are thinking. What is this survey going to do? How long is it going to take me to fill this out? If I take the 5 minutes to fill this out, will it be worth my time? Do you use this for service improvement, or is this like a vendor that I'm rating? Do you reward agents or penalize them based on these responses? That's going to change my responses too. So there's a false positive that you need to watch out for there too. So instead of hiding this information, share it. Let them know what you're going to do with their responses. You're going to get better responses. You're going to get more of them. And that's going to give you better results and input on your changes. So try to keep the WIIFM in mind. And in an ideal world, you've stopped sending surveys, right? Customers are getting feedback and employees are providing feedback as part of the experience when, ding, negative feedback comes in. How do you respond? Hopefully with joy, because that negative response is an opportunity. It is power. Negative feedback is power to change something in a positive way. It's your ammunition. It's the way that you're going to be able to convince other people to change the processes and services to fit your customers' needs. So book that person for a conversation. Send them an IM. Connect with them over email. Get them on a webcam and turn your camera on. You're going to form a relationship. You're going to learn about your culture and your company. You might even learn about somewhere else in the world if you're a global company. But it's going to be highly valuable and worth your time. So do it with your camera on. See if they turn on their camera. Develop that friendship. Finally, I have some crazy ideas on this topic, so some food for thought. Not all of these are that radical, but consider surveying your agents. Ask them how they feel about the service that they provided on this ticket. That's a really useful way to just understand how your agents are feeling. Also, you could pre-survey them. How do you think this customer is going to rate your service transaction today? And if the agent says 10 and the customer says 7, there's a gap there. Either the agent doesn't completely understand the context of the person, or they've got a bloated sense of success. But that is a great training opportunity right there. How do I actually close that gap up? Excuse me. Put the survey results on tickets. This is not a radical idea, but it is useful to agents because they go back and look at these tickets. It's useful to you if you're doing archaeology or trying to pick through tickets to figure out what went on. But you do need to have some cultural sensitivity to this. There are names involved and negativity and negative impacts. You need to make sure that your company's culture and your team's culture is one that allows negative feedback without it hurting relationships. You want to keep that positive relationship so that when your agents see people in the hallway or on teams, they don't just cringe and close up. Try to understand what an abandoned survey is. If someone is loading the survey and not filling it out, sometimes that can mean something way worse is happening. Like the service transaction was so bad, I can't actually write it down or document it because it's unprofessional. I can't type those words in here because I will feel unprofessional. It's possible also that they're just so upset they can't fill it out, or you're not asking the right questions to get their feelings out. So always kind of try to understand what that gap is. If you're only getting a 10% response rate, what does the other 90% look like? Finally, never design a survey by committee. You're not going to get clear results. It's not going to have a cohesive feeling. And really, your survey shouldn't be so complex that a committee even needs to be involved. That's usually a sign that you've got, a bad survey on your hands. 20 questions, 4 pages, half hour. You don't want that kind of survey. No one's going to answer it, and they'll never answer any survey you ever send ever again. Maybe. So don't design by committee. So don't send surveys until you've done the research. Do the legwork. Use telemetry. You might not even need to send a survey. Focus on what's going to change based on the results. This is an opportunity to get rid of those metrics that you don't actually need anymore, and instead focus on the goals and needs of the organization. Close the loop on feedback, especially negative feedback. Take the time to review research together. This is imperative. Don't just keep the evidence and research locked away in a locker to use someday. Share it with your teams. Imagine the power of an agent knowing what they need to change based on the feedback that they're hearing. Finally, understand the impacts of surveys on the experience itself. Don't just keep many simple transactions are made worse by sending another spammy email and interrupting an employee. So you want to use those opportunities to capture metrics and other data within the experience. Finally, if there's one thing that you take back from this, it's that surveys do not necessarily always serve your customers' needs. Always look for ways to use telemetry and archaeology and other tools to embed the answers to your survey and find them in the experience. There are lots of ways to collect input, from interviews to making it a part of your call procedure to embedding it in your processes, your products, and your applications. So choose the best way to collect feedback for your customer, your teams, and your culture. Finally, I want to say thank you. I hope you found this useful. Please consider subscribing to Ticket Volume, my podcast where we explore topics like this with some of the top thought leaders in the industry. And thank you so much for your time and attention. Leave some questions and comments below. Send them to me. Find me on LinkedIn. Let me know where I screwed up and what you'd like to see next. Thanks for coming. I'll see you around the way.